So today was a very exciting day for the overall markets as we pretty much saw a lot of names push upwards and end up in the green. And this is actually in sync with what I talked about in the beginning of December. I said, hey, December is going to be a month where ultimately things move sideways for Tesla, but I believe that things are going to push upwards and still be a little bit more positive as we end December. And so we actually got a very interesting day when we take a look at Tesla, as in the beginning of the day we pretty much saw Tesla stock sell off and fall off. We're going to go ahead and talk about the reason behind that, but then towards the middle of the day, or I guess towards the later half of the day, we ended up seeing Tesla rally upwards. And so I want to go ahead and talk about why we saw Tesla stock push upwards towards the end of the day, as well as what we should be mindful of as we move forward. Now, one of the things I often say on this channel is that we want to pay attention to a multitude of different data. You just can't look at one data point, and you have to approach the markets from a multi-dimensional approach, right? You have to look at all the data coming in, and one of the data points I often highlight is paying attention to the economic data. See, one of the things I said is that most likely we're going to have a very bullish rally for today as we were having the FOMC make a decision on monetary policy, and I said it's pretty much certain that they are going to pause. Now again, I don't have a crystal ball, but for the entirety of 2023, I got every single rate decision on monetary policy pretty much correct to the exact basis points. Now again, I'm not trying to give myself a pat on the back. I'm sure in the future I'll get it wrong by a few basis points, but we had the Federal Reserve pause, and so that was ultimately bullish. But one thing that a lot of people didn't talk about, right? A lot of the individuals talking on X, on YouTube, talking about the update on monetary policy is something else we got from an economic standpoint, and that is the summary of economic projections. See, if you go to the Federal Reserve website, federalreserve.gov, we see that pretty much for this meeting, we see this asterisk, and that means that there is a summary of economic projections as well as the decision on monetary policy. And so this is pretty interesting because we got an update on the dot plot from the Federal Reserve. And so when we take a look at what the central bankers are forecasting at the Federal Reserve for the year of 2024, we see that there's this consensus of the idea of rates dropping down to 4.5%. And again, this is in sync with what I talked about going into 2024. See, back in 2023, a few months ago, I said the Fed, they are done hiking. There's no need to hike. We're seeing all the data move in their favor, and hiking too much could pretty much break the markets. Now, I still think they over tightened a bit, but we'll have to see how they react in 2024. I said, hey, most likely we're going to have a recession in 2024, and we're going to have a lot of hardship just from an economical standpoint. But if we see the Federal Reserve act very fast and start cutting aggressively, I'm talking big cuts in 2024, well, that could possibly help us kind of stay in this soft landing idea, although I still disagree that they're going to do that. But that's something that we want to be mindful of. But looking back at Tesla stock, we see that pretty much the big moves came at 2 o'clock, where we had the update on monetary policy, the update on them going to pause, which was something I said was going to happen. And then at 2:30, we saw Tesla stock push upwards aggressively, as well as we had the speech from Jerome Powell. And interestingly enough, we got this huge pivot from Jerome Powell. In fact, Nikki T, who is one of the journalists for the Wall Street Journal, made this tweet saying that pretty much on December 1st, Powell said it would be premature to speculate on when policy might ease. And then on December 13th, Powell comes out and says that rate cuts are something that begins to come into view and clearly is a topic of discussion. And he goes on to say, man, what a difference 2 weeks can make. So we had this huge pivot from Jerome Powell, kind of having this hawkish rhetoric that they're not ready to kind of even talk about rate cuts and rate easing. And now, just 2 weeks later, we have this huge flip. And again, this is because the Federal Reserve is aware that they may have tightened too much and they have to act aggressively. Now, are they going to cut aggressively? We don't know. We'll have to wait and see what ends up taking place. But this was a huge, interesting pivot, and that's why we saw the overall markets push upwards. And again, further in this video, I want to kind of talk about the price action for the S&P 500 and Tesla stock, and I want us to kind of take a look at a few interesting ideas that we want to be aware of. Now, I found this photo on Twitter, and it's obviously AI generated, but it's this bear that's getting operated by doctors or surgeons, whatever, someone in the or people in the medical field. And I thought it was hilarious because a lot of the bears who are bearish on Tesla are pretty much getting hurt big time, even after Tesla had some bad news. And so we have to talk about the bad news before we even kind of move forward and talk about the good news. And so the bad news we got today was that Tesla is recalling millions of vehicles amid a probe into the autopilot crashes, according to the Wall Street Journal. This was one of the reasons why we pretty much saw Tesla stock falling down aggressively before we had that update in economic data with or monetary policy with the central bankers. In fact, specifically today, we had the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration say that part of its investigation, it had reviewed 956 crashes in which autopilot was said to have been used. And so, of course, this is really bad for Tesla, but I want us to pay attention on why this is something that we shouldn't go crazy about. I know the bears were like all cheering, like, oh yes, I told you Tesla autopilot was bad. They were all happy and cheering, but I want you guys to look at this. See, further on in the article, it says the company, which is Tesla, will offer owners a free software update that adds more driver alerts and controls to further encourage them to remain attentive while using autopilot to steer within a lane. Now, the reason I wanted to highlight that, right, number one, is because a lot of these crashes with autopilot isn't really a Tesla thing. It's really the individuals who are using autopilot improperly, right? You still have to have your hands on the wheel and be attentive to the road. And so definitely that's something that's a big concern. And of course, this does impact Tesla, but one of the things that we have to also understand, number two, is that when Tesla does a recall, it's not your traditional automaker recall, right? A lot of times when you hear other automakers do a recall, you gotta, drive your car up to the dealership, they'll swap up whatever part that's bad or do that maintenance. But for Tesla, it's literally just a free software update. And so that, term recall is kind of used incorrectly. It has like this negative connotation because we get recalls with our Apple devices all the time. I mean, how many times do you get updates? Let me just pull it out on your iPhone. I think I gotta do one right now. I haven't updated it in a while, but we don't call that recalls. We just call that updates. But unfortunately, just that term has a negative connotation, but it's really just a nothing burger. And so that's something I wanted to point out. But of course, I can't continue in this video without talking about all the positive updates that we got yesterday. So yesterday I was in my bed. I ended up taking an accidental nap. I didn't mean to fall asleep. And when I woke up randomly at 1 a.m., I saw a whole bunch of good tweets in regards to Tesla. There was one thing that was bad, so we'll start off with the bad, but there was definitely a lot of goodness that came out yesterday while I was sleeping. So starting off with the bad, we had Sawyer Merritt tweet out this breaking news that Tesla has received an updated guidance from the IRS and that the Model 3 rear-wheel drive and long range will lose the entire $7,500 federal EV tax credit starting January 1st of 2024. And so previously it thought that it was just going to be cut to $3,750, but now they're pretty much losing their entire EV tax credit. And so of course that is bad news for those models for Tesla, and so that's something we want to be mindful of. But we also got a lot of good news. For example, here we have a tweet from the Tesla Optimist page on x.com showing that there's a new bot in town, and it had a video. I just screenshotted it. I wasn't going to play the whole entire video, but if we take a look here, I screenshotted it where we see pretty much the new Optimist bot handling an egg. They talk about all the updates that the Optimist bot has, and I'm not going to run through all the updates, but just know that the Tesla Optimist robot is now on its 2nd gen version. Now, this is pretty interesting because it was pretty quiet about the Optimist bots. I know in one of the previous earnings call, Elon Musk mentioned that this could be one of the reasons why Tesla could be one of the most valuable companies in the world going on to the future. But then in the earnings call after that, we didn't hear any updates about the Tesla Optimus bots, and that was something I was kind of, just upset about. I wanted to hear more because last we heard they really didn't make too many of these, as it was not as easy to make them. But we just recently got this update that they're making a generation 2 of these robots, and of course that's positive. It's good news. It's a good catalyst, but it doesn't really mean much because we still don't know how much they're gonna make and when they're gonna scale them up. But it's still positive news. But with that said, I also want to point out to something else we saw. For example, we also had this tweet from Sawyer Merritt, which, by the way, I often share tweets from Sawyer Merritt because he's one of the individuals on X.com that anytime there's an update for Tesla, he's pretty much one of the first people to tweet about it. But anyways, in this tweet, he mentions that Tesla has surpassed Ford to become the most searched auto brand in the US, according to Compare the Market data. It goes on to say that Tesla's gone from not making the rankings at all in 2022 to second place in 2023, with 29 out of the 155 countries listing Tesla as the #1 car brand in Google Trends. And so we're seeing this huge search volume for Tesla, which is definitely pretty impressive and definitely good news. Of course, this is more under the category of alternative data, right? As I said earlier in the beginning of this video, you want to look at Tesla from a multitude, or not just Tesla, but the overall markets from a multi-dimensional approach. And so we don't just look at the charts or only look at the fundamentals. We look at the macroeconomic environment. We see what's going on with fiscal policy, monetary policy, as well as the alternative data, right? And so this is pretty interesting. But with that said, I want us to go ahead and hop into my laptop so we could go ahead and talk about the price action for Tesla further, as well as what are some other things we're seeing take place in the markets or the overall broader markets, as well as things that we want to be mindful of moving forward. So with that said, before we do so, actually make sure to tap that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and also hit that like button as well, as it really does help out with the channel. And now that I said that and got all that YouTube stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and hop into my laptop. Alrighty, so we are taking a look at Tesla, and as mentioned in the beginning of this video, very interesting in regards to what we saw today. We saw Tesla stock fall down, lots of selling pressure due to the negative catalyst of the recalls, and then pretty much we had the economic data just rise Tesla to the top, something I called out on this channel before, and we saw Tesla stock actually close up higher than the day prior, so that was definitely good news. And of course, I want to talk more about the price action for Tesla, but I also want to highlight something else that's pretty interesting, right? This is just funny to watch. This is the S&P 500 index ETF, ticker symbol SPY, and we see that pretty much we sold off in the beginning of the day, pretty much started falling down, and we rocket launched the minute we had the update on monetary policy, and it looks like it's still pushing forward. And the reason why this is interesting is because a while back I highlighted how we were at a very pivotal moment. We were at this area where it was an area of resistance for quite some time, right? So we got rejected back in the last rally that we had in July. This was a really good rally for the market, so we ended up falling down quite a bit. And then going into December 1st, we kind of kissed it, got rejected, continued falling down, and then we ultimately broke out of that trend. So the overall markets, or really the S&P 500, is in this bullish uptrend, and which is why I find that joke about the bears, needing to get surgery and operated, funny, because, man, those bears, they really thought that November and December was going to be just a terrible month for stocks and that Santa wasn't coming, but Santa did indeed come, right? We did see markets push up. I guess it wasn't Santa, but really Jerome Powell. But very interesting to watch. Now, going into Tesla, right? So Tesla is at a very interesting area. I do believe that December is going to close ultimately higher. As I said, December is a pretty choppy month, but I do believe it's going to close up higher. And we see a lot of choppiness, but still up from, let's see, December 1st is right around over here. So we're actually still slightly up. I said that December wasn't going to be that big month like we saw in November, where things just catapulted. I'm not maybe pronouncing that incorrectly, but just rocket launched up, I guess is another way to say it. And so one thing we want to be mindful of is that there's a lot of volume relative to price around over here, meaning that there's a lot of exchanging between buyers and sellers at these price levels for Tesla, and so that's going to provide some friction. I don't think Tesla is going to continue rocket launching like the overall markets, but I do see Tesla closing higher. We are still in this descending trend line. There's been a strong descending trend line, I believe, since 2021. I know it's kind of crazy. We had such a bullish 2023,
But if we actually look at it, right, because this is the beginning of 2023, very bullish year. But 2022 was such a negative year with all the rate cuts, Elon Musk selling, and so we actually haven't broken out of this descending trend line. So that's something we want to be mindful of. Now, I do want to just provide a mini disclosure. I am long-term invested in Tesla. I have exposure to Tesla in my long-term portfolio, and I'm still bullish on Tesla going into the future, 2025 or even 2030. Until things change, then I'll change my mind on not being bullish. But I'm still bullish on Tesla for the long term. I do expect some challenges in 2024, as there's still going to be some pain in the economy. So we want to be kind of still looking at the economic data. It's not still like a moment to cheer. Yeah, inflation's coming down, but one of the things we want to pay attention is the labor markets, and of course interest rates are still relatively high. Yes, they're going to be getting cut in 2024. They're projected to get cut, but it doesn't change immediately. And so the first 2 quarters, I still expect some challenges for Tesla. So that's something that we want to be mindful of. Looking into economic data, Friday, December 22nd, we actually get a plethora of data coming out, but we actually have the PCE coming out and the core PCE, which if you guys don't know, that's another inflationary gauge. That's actually the inflationary gauge that the Fed prefers. A lot of individuals are familiar with CPI, Consumer Price Index, but the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index is actually what the Federal Reserve likes to look at. And so that's something else that we're going to be mindful of, because we're still going to want to pay attention to inflation coming downwards. And so that's coming out on December 22nd. As far as a trade idea, I am taking short-term trades in Tesla, my trading account, and I just want to specify I have a long-term portfolio that I don't touch. It's mostly index funds with a few stocks like Tesla, etc. But in my short-term trading account, I am taking some scalp trades for Tesla. There are some swing trades that I've mentioned within the Push and Profit private group, but I'll kind of want to keep that exclusive for them. But with that said, guys, you guys let me know what are your thoughts for Tesla going into, first off, closing into December, right? Do you guys agree that Tesla is going to have that, green close for December? Or do you guys actually believe this is pretty much the peak and, we're actually going to get a rug pull from us with Tesla? So you guys let me know, and also your thoughts on 2024, especially the first 2 quarters. But with that said, I don't want to take up too much time. Before you guys go, make sure to watch this next video right over here, talking about the bears and what they believe for 2024 for Tesla. With that said, I'll see you guys on that next video. Take care, guys.